are unfamiliar with the archives totally, we are a unique facility and regional museum. Our mission is to collect representative bodies of work by Ohio's visual artists, and we make it available to the public through exhibitions and programs just like this one. We're located in University Circle. We do have a physical space. It's an archive and a gallery and an office space, which we share the building with the Sculpture Center. And that's located in right across from the west wall of the historic Lakeview Cemetery. Our gallery is open to the public, no appointments necessary. You do have to wear a mask. And just so you know, our staff has been fully vaccinated, so we're all good there. Our regular hours are Wednesday through Friday from 10 to 4 and Saturday 12 to 4. And right now we have up in our gallery space our 2021 annual members exhibition. That's up till May 29th, so you still have a couple weeks to come see it. I will say that on Friday, the 21st, we are participating in a campus-wide opening event with the Sculpture Center. This is going to be the first time that we've opened up for a big event, like a reception for the public since the pandemic started. So it's kind of a big deal. So the Sculpture Center will be open along with the David Davis Studios from 6:30 to 9 p.m. And the Sculpture Center has an exhibition of works by Kylie Ford and Emily Duke. And there will be a projection at the nighttime installed in the courtyard by CIA student David Ross. That starts at 8. Some other upcoming events that we have going on: Thursday, June 17th is the opening reception for a solo exhibition of newly archived artist Ken Nevedomi, featuring some really badass paintings by Ken that are part of our permanent collection, as well as work that we borrowed from Art Neo and from Nevedomi himself, courtesy of Michael Wolf's gallery. In August, we are opening a big show called Converge. This is the largest survey exhibition of works by LGBTQ artists presented in the Western Reserve ever. We are doing this in conjunction with the Cleveland LGBT Community Center in Gordon Square, Metro Health's main campus gallery, and the Royce Gallery at Lake Erie College. So the show will be presented in 4 venues simultaneously. It is the documentation and celebration of the contributions of our LGBTQ artists to the cultural fabric of our community. And as far as we can tell, there has never been a really big historical documentation of the artists. So this is fully within our mission of the archives to hold this show, and we're really excited about it. The Converge curation team is led by Kelly Pontoni, who you can see right now. Kelly is our collections registrar, and includes Sam Butler, Mark Yazinchek, and Tony Williams. So it is an artist curated exhibition. It's going to be fantastic. We are currently accepting donations to help fund this exhibition. So if you would like an opportunity to support the artists of your community, please contact us. And there will be some information at a PowerPoint slide at the end of this whole presentation that has some contact information for the archives. I do want to remind you that there will also be a survey at the end of this presentation that pops up when you close out of Zoom. And so if you could please participate in the survey, we really appreciate that. We need that for our grantors and our funders. And speaking of our funders, I would like to thank all of our funders, starting with the Bernice and David E. Davis Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, the Gunn Foundation, the Zufall Foundation, the Ohio Arts Council, and the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County through Cuyahoga Arts and Cultures. And of course, I'd also like to thank all of our members and our individual donors. Thank you very much. You've gotten us through a very difficult year, and we're really appreciative that we can still be here, that we can still be presenting all of these great programs for you guys. So now I would like to introduce our program and marketing manager, Megan Alves. She is going to give you some information and turn the program over to our panelists. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. Panelists, thank you. Michael Gill, thank you for moderating. And Megan, please take it away.
Good. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It is a delight. My name is Megan Alves, and I'm the marketing and program manager here at the Artist Archives. We've had an overwhelming response to this program, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for logging on to Zoom and also for being on Facebook Live, where Kelly Pontoni is manning the manning the fort right there. The May Show was such an important part of the history of Cleveland art, and it brings up a lot of powerful emotions and a lot of memories for people. I wanted to take a moment to actually thank all of the people who shared all their stories on social media and participated even in advance of this program before it occurred. So I hope a lot of you were able to actually sign on tonight. The goal of the program is to present a well-rounded conversation about all the different things surrounding the May Show, including all the positive things the museum has done and continues to do for the community, as well as acknowledge the people in the organizations that have continued the legacy of the May Show, including Michael Gill, and we'll get more on that later. The questions that surround big museums and community engagement are just that. They're big. And we are so looking forward to exploring them today with the wisdom of our amazing panelists. At the helm of today's discussion is moderator Michael Gill, the founding executive director of the Collective Arts Network, an organization which has truly taken up the mantle of supporting, promoting, and tenaciously advancing the cause of local art. Prior to Can, he served as the arts editor at both the Cleveland Free Times and the Cleveland Forum. And prior to that, he was the marketing director at the Beck Center for the Arts. So his full bio and the bio of all of the presenters is available at artistarchives.org. Before we begin, I wanted to mention a few quick Zoom features. I know you are all exhausted of Zoom and some things, but I want to make sure you have the best program possible. So here are some features. One is the chat. So the chat looks like a little cartoon bubble. So we ask that you use it kind of sparingly during the program, so you give the full attention to the presenters. But if you are having a problem, go ahead and pop it in the chat. I'll make sure to see it and send you a message. You can also use the hand raise function via Zoom, not actually raising your hand, I might miss it. And I'll take care of you there. And then finally, a really important part of the program is that we have a Q&A at the end. The Q&A is designated by two little bubbles and a Q&A somewhere on your Zoom screen. So go ahead and type your questions there. And if they're for a specific presenter, put that name in there. Please do not put the questions in the regular chat because quite frankly, I might miss them and we want to give good attention. So Michael's going to do his best to get through some of the questions, but we probably won't get through them all, in which case we encourage you to continue the conversation on the Facebook Live event discussion. I'll pop a link in the chat there. So without further ado, we're going to kick it over to Michael, who will be the captain of the conversation today. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I just needed a second to unmute myself. And thank you to Artist Archives for pulling this together. It has had great response, and that's a testament to how interested people are in this discussion. And thank you also to all of you panelists for agreeing to be a part of the conversation. It's certainly an honor for me to be involved with you in this talk. And as I tell people who you are, which is the first thing I'm going to do, they will understand what I mean. Henry Adams is the author of about 400 articles and 30 books in the American art field. Henry has written widely on Cleveland art, including books and catalogs on the artists Victor Schreckengost, Paul Travis, Frank Wilcox, Edris Eckhart, and Dexter Davis, as well as on the Cocoon Club and Cleveland Modernism before the Armory Show. He's also, I'm really proud to say, a regular contributor to Can Journal and has been a provocateur on this subject. In April of 2014, Henry wrote an article in Can that asked, why won't the Cleveland Museum of Art bring back the May Show? And that kicked off a year's worth of responses, which we'll hear a little bit more about later. Our panelist, Kijo Lee, is Director of Academic Affairs and Associate Curator of Special Projects at the Cleveland Museum of Art. She designs and implements programs to inspire scholarly engagement with the museum's collections. She creates and tracks opportunities for undergraduate and graduate students' exposure to humanities fields. And this is like a history shaping role. We all talk about how to engage younger people, and Kijo is doing it. Her expertise is in American art history, the history of photography, and African American studies, as well as in museum education. She is responsible for curatorial and publication projects on behalf of the museum that highlight the intersection of scholarly work and public audiences, as well as illuminating works in the collection by artists of the Black diaspora. She's currently a PhD candidate in art history and African American studies at Yale University. Her dissertation is titled Precarious Matters, with the S in parentheses, Photography, Physics, and Blackness. And finally, most of you in this audience certainly know that Steven Litt has been the art and architecture critic of the Plain Dealer in Cleveland since 1991. His work has also appeared in Art News, Metropolis, Architecture, Landscape Architecture, and other magazines. He has a bachelor's degree in art from Brown University, a master's degree in journalism from Columbia, a master's degree in city planning from Cleveland State. He's a 2010 winner of the Cleveland Arts Prize, a 2016 inductee into the Cleveland Press Club Hall of Fame, and the 2019 winner of the Centennial Award of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association. In 2020, Steve was awarded the Leo Rabkin Prize for Arts Journalism. So I'm in good company. And I'm also sort of a newcomer to the May Show. This is the light portion of this program. My mother-in-law, you didn't expect to hear that, did you? My mother-in-law is a lurker on my Facebook page, and she saw there some promotion for this conversation, and she may be watching this. And so I'm going to begin by noting that at family dinner in April, I learned that when my father-in-law took her on their very first date, they went to the May Show. That was in the early 60s. I grew up in Cleveland, but art was not a significant part of my own childhood, and I never went to the May Show. I've not seen a May Show ever. When I came back to this area after college and a few jobs, that was 1992, and the museum had ended this show at that point. I think that was the last year. However, my first job in Cleveland was at Beck Center for the Arts, and subsequently I've been involved in different arts capacities ever since, and I've been hearing about this show ever since. All the organizations concerned with the history of Northeast Ohio art, whether they were dealers or organizations associated with the preservation or the advancement of regional work, they would invariably list May Show credits among the artists that they were recognizing and exhibiting. I'd hear it from individual artists. I'd go to dinner with poets, and somebody would tell me their husband was in the May Show. In spring 2014, Can Journal published an essay by Henry Adams, the one I mentioned before, who asked, why won't the Cleveland Museum bring back the May Show? And this touched off a series of responses that became a year-long series of stories. The first one came from Fred Bidwell, who I hope is out there somewhere. Fred was the interim director of the museum at the time. And then the next came from the dealer, James Corcoran of Corcoran Fine Arts. And he has paid a lot of attention to the credentials that he finds on stickers on the back of works that he's selling. And he talked about the value that pedigree has added to local art history. And then, you know, batting cleanup, as it were, the last contributor to that series was William Busta. And Bill, I'm sure you all know, is an authority on the region's art through lived experience from running the William Busta Gallery. that story was illustrated with photos of a couple of t-shirts. And if I can do this just quickly, I'm going to try to show you one of those. This was designed by Rob Mahaly, who was the director of Spaces at the time. It says, when buying art in Cleveland, always look for the May Show seal of approval. Rob Mahaly was director of Spaces at that time, and there were actually a couple of shirts in that series. And this prompted us to headline Bill's essay, The May Show. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. You know, that says something about the impact of the May Show, that it had, the impact it had on collecting art in the region. A couple of years later, you know, it just keeps coming back. I was at the City Club. William Griswold was speaking to the City Club. He was new as director of the Cleveland Museum. And he had really important things to say. In the news at that time, there was a lot of coverage of the repatriation of art and artifacts to the cultures that they had come from. And so, of course, from around the world, objects have come to major encyclopedic museums under a variety of circumstances. And this is a super complicated subject. And he had been talking about that provenance and cultural sensitivity for like 45 minutes. And of course, if you know the City Club, you know that they have a question and answer period. And so the very first question, as soon as they started to pass the microphone, was, when are you going to bring back the May Show? Which was just amazing. Like you could hear this ripple of both intrigue and well, I don't know what else, go across the City Club floor. There are big issues associated with this conversation. I love this conversation because it gets to questions about what the purpose of a museum is and what obligation does a major museum, which is a major economic force, major institution in town, what obligation does it have to its community? What role do artists play in that community? And what interest, even strategic interest, does a museum have in engaging its local artists beyond the level of hiring them to create props and costumes for community festivals like Parade the Circle, or to create opportunities for family engagement like during the Chalk Festival? This conversation is about the May Show, but really it begins with that specific thing. And I hope that as we continue talking, we get to talk not only about the history and the hows and whys of that specific show, but how the museum and the people in this conversation relate to creating art history, how their decisions will inform art history, whether museums are advocates for the work they present, and whether they're advocates for their own communities. So our format is that we'll hear first individually from each of our panelists. They'll each talk for 5 to 7 minutes or so. And then we'll follow that with moderated discussion. I'll ask some questions of the panel generally and individually. And then after that, we'll take questions from the audience. When we were putting this together, I said that at this point that I would flip a coin. And of course, I was trying to figure out some way, because I don't have a three-sided coin. I was thinking some process of elimination or what have you. But in the meantime, Henry Adams has graciously volunteered to start the conversation. So we'll hear first from Henry, and then after Henry, I'll introduce our next speaker. Henry, take it away. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Michael. And I might say that Can has been a wonderful contribution to the community. And also thank you, Mindy and Megan. For about half a century, the May Show, which was a panorama of living art from Cleveland and Northwest Ohio, was the single most popular exhibition of the year every year at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and it played an important role in supporting local artists and creating a vibrant artistic community. It attracted crowds, it unleashed controversy and discussion about modern art, and it stimulated sales and financial support for Cleveland artists. Sadly, the May Show took a series of wrong turns after the retirement of the museum director who created it, William Milliken, and was essentially dead decades before it was finally discontinued in the 1990s. But it seems to me a no-brainer that it should be brought back, and that doing so would not only help the arts community, but would make the image of the museum much friendlier and more welcoming. Indeed, it could play an important role in revitalizing the city of Cleveland and the national image that it presents. The arguments against the May Show strike me as pretentious, hypocritical, and intellectually feeble. The central complaint is that not everything in the show was of world-class quality. Surely this was the case, but so what? Milliken's successor, Sherman Lee, was obsessed with the notion that the museum should focus on artistic quality and on accumulating objects of world-class excellence. This is surely a good idea in its place, but in many regards, this idea rings hollow. I don't want to dismiss the contributions of Sherman Lee. But for one thing, Sherman Lee's judgments of artistic quality were by no means infallible, as indicated by the fact that he spent huge sums of money on a completely fake, flabby, vacuous painting that was supposed to be by Grunwald because it was supposedly by a big name painter, while he was ignoring artists of authentic talent who were working right across the street from the museum, such as Victor Schreckengast or Julian Stanczak. More significantly, he ignored the larger role of the museum in the community, and he created a museum in which art guards were posted at the door in order to make members of the surrounding community feel unwelcome. Indeed, the game of purchasing art has always had an unsavory financial aspect. It easily becomes a form of gambling, of trying to guess what will soar in financial value, rather than thinking in terms of the role that art can play in a healthy community. What about thinking more idealistically and democratically about the positive social role that a museum can play? In the early 20th century, under progressive Mayor Tom Johnson, Cleveland was widely considered the best run city in America. I think it's not entirely a coincidence that during the Sherman Lee years, as the art museum became more of a walled citadel, as gunmen at the door scared neighborhood people away, its reputation as a livable city sadly slipped. Today, Cleveland comes in number 5 in a list of the fastest shrinking American cities, has ranked number 4 in a poll of the gloomiest places in America, and stands at number 20 in a list of the least safe places to live. To outsiders, it's probably best known for the fact that in 1961, its river, the Cuyahoga, was so polluted that it caught on fire. At its height, Cleveland was the 6th largest city in the United States. Today, it stands at number 51, a notch behind Wichita, Kansas. If we want to reverse this decline, which has been a decline in civic morale as well as in population, I think it's clear that the Cleveland Museum of Art can play an important role. Museums were once sleepy places with old objects in dusty cases. Over the last few decades, however, it's been shown that they can play a role as a community gathering place, as a place for lectures, concerts, and artistic happenings, and with amenities such as a cafe, a restaurant, and a bookstore. Indeed, in many ways, the new atrium of the Cleveland Museum serves as a sort of civic piazza, a public square where people can stroll and gather. In fact, in recent years, the museum has sponsored 2 magnificently successful events, the Chalk Festival and Parade the Circle. that have been somewhat similar to the May Show in their populist aspects, both organized by an artist and organizer of wonderful talent, idealism, and ability, Robin van Leer. In a number of regards, these provide a model of what the May Show could become. Essentially, the Chalk Festival is an event for kids, which makes art fun for kids. Parade the Circle is more ambitious. A true community festival, it's a dazzling display of local talent with amazing stilt walkers, costumes and floats, jugglers, and participants of all ages and very varied backgrounds. Over the year, it has grown from a very small beginning to an annual attendance of about 50,000 people. At a time when America has been divided by race, by neighborhood, and by economic opportunity, and it's been going through a lot of nasty name calling, Parade the Circle has shown that America could become something different. It has brought together people who would not usually connect to have fun and to marvel at each other's creativity and talent. Lest there be confusion on the matter, I do indeed have a side that's an art snob. But even from that viewpoint, it seems to me that the display of theatrical flair and artistic talent at Parade the Circle has been quite up to the level of most of the traveling exhibitions on view of the museum, many of which have been distinctly lackluster. What's a shame is that Robin van Leer has done remarkable things on the outside grounds of the museum, but has never been allowed to exercise her talent inside. What she could offer has never been allowed to come through the front door. I think the key to a successful May Show is to think of it as a community festival with somewhat different rules and guidelines than the museum's other exhibitions. In fact, the very goal of the May Show should be to upend things, to turn things upside down, very much on the model of the concept of carnival explored by the Russian philosopher Mikhail Bakhtin. We can get rid of worries that the new May Show will tarnish the museum's standards of quality by beginning with the premise that, while the show might well have prizes, there's no particular reason why the museum needs to purchase what's shown for the permanent collection. Let's think of the May Show as an event, as a festival, rather than as something that needs to be preserved forever, to be trapped forever in amber. To be sure, it'd be fun to have prizes, if only to stir up arguments. And perhaps it would also be fun to bring in world-famous artists like David Hockney, Carol Walker, Ai Weiwei, Jeff Koons, or Dale Chihuly to serve as jurors. They might stir up some lively conversation as well. In fact, in my opinion, a failure of the May Show in the past is that it was concerned too much with quality rather than too little. It'd be nice, for example, to develop a forum so that talented high school students could show their work in the museum on the model of the Senior Scholastic Art and Writing Awards. No doubt some of the winners of the Senior Scholastic Honors went on no further than that single award, but a surprising number of them went on to make a mark, clearly inspired by the awards they had won, including such noteworthies as Andy Warhol, Sylvia Plath, Truman Capote, Richard Avedon, and the actor Robert Redford. Isn't it likely that there are kids, and perhaps also some grown-up artists in Cleveland, whose talents wither because they receive no encouragement? Shouldn't we do what we can to help the seeds of talent to grow? Even if they don't become great artists, wouldn't it be nice to give their creativity a spark? And even aside from whether there are any kids in Cleveland who have genuine artistic talent, although I think there's no question that there are, this would surely open up the museum to new audiences who feel that they've been shut out. You can bet that if kids had their work on view in the museum, that their parents, friends, and relatives would come to see it. If the museum wants to get 1 million visitors in a year, this would be a good way and an extremely easy way to achieve that goal. It seems to me that if the museum wants to establish deep roots of support in the community, if Cleveland wants to become a vibrant artistic and cultural center, for that matter, if it wants to become an economically prosperous city, bringing back the May Show, while certainly not a complete solution to the city's problems, would be a good way to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. I think that last sentence sort of shows us the level of expectation that some people have of the museum generally, and people.
And
certainly.
I might mention, the Cleveland Museum is much wealthier than most American art museums. It has $2 billion in assets. And when you look at that amount in assets, the creativity of the museum, while it's on the model of other American museums, is basically meeting the level of productivity of museums that have 10% or 5% of their assets. I think the museum has really fallen short in a lot of ways.
It's certainly
And
huge.
that's not to say that it's not a good thing. You know, I have students at Case Western Reserve, and they're thrilled when I take them to the Cleveland Museum.
It is absolutely an incredible asset and has gigantic capacity. Thank you, Henry.
Yeah.
Stephen, I'm going to call on you next. In the interest of point counterpoint, I am looking forward to hearing what Steven Litt has to say. Stephen?
Thanks, Michael. Now I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. And can you all see that?
Yes, we got you, Steve. So if you
Okay.
slide,
So,
that will do it.
all right. Now I'm not sure how to get this.
So under slideshow, if you click that, there
Yeah.
will be an option on the far left which says play from start, and that's your Huckleberry.
There we go. Okay.
You got it, sir.
So you can see all my little thumbnails. I'm going to move those over here. Pardon me for doing that. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I'm the bad cop tonight. I was here in 1993 for the last May show, and did not find it a very captivating experience. Before I get to that, though, no, it's not letting me advance. So I'm going to have to escape from this and.
Okay.
Well, this is interesting.
So, oh, there at the bottom, I see the controls. So
Oh, I see. Okay.
there you go.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so yes, as Michael mentioned, I've been the art and architecture critic at the Plain Dealer and now Cleveland.com for a total of 30 years. I think I'm the only reporter in this community who has covered 7 out of the 9 directors of the Cleveland Museum of Art and its 100-year history, or 100-year plus history. That would include Sherman Lee in the upper left, whom we've spoken about, and we've heard Henry speak about a moment ago. I interviewed Sherman Lee a number of times when I was the art critic at the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina. And Sherman Lee had retired to Chapel Hill, so I got to know him there. And indeed, he was not a great enthusiast about the May show. And I covered Evan Turner in moving over one to the right, who was a director from 83 to 93, and who oversaw the last May show in his final year. Bob Bergman from 1993 to 99, then Catherine Reed, 2000, 2005, Timothy Rubb, from 2006 to 2009, David Franklin, 2010 to 2013, and now Bill Griswold, who is going on 7 years here. I have some photos that I wanted to share, historic photos of the May Show. This is the second May Show in 1920. You've seen this picture before on the screen of the evening's events. This is a photo of Libby Norweb, who was head of the junior council at the Cleveland Museum of Art. And I think this gives you a flavor of what the May Show was like, a kind of an intimate community affair at one time, attracted the subjects of some of the artworks there. I think the reasons why I was not captivated by it, and I'm not in favor of reviving it now, and the way that it was conducted in the past as an annual, was that my experience of it was that it was visually dull, crowded with mediocre work, and it was unpopular with audiences. As I recall, it drew 20,000 visitors over 8 weeks or so in 1993. And as I wrote at the time, I felt the show did a disservice to the local art community because it set a low bar for both artists and audience. Typically, hundreds of artists would submit from images in slide form from which a single curator or visiting curator or group of jurors would select works to be displayed. And the show put the museum in the passive position of choosing work from artists who chose to submit rather than putting the institution in a more active curatorial role. Artists could display 1 or 2 works, so each was accorded a sliver of attention rather than having a chance to have their work understood in depth. The museum was selling works out of the show, enabling local enthusiasts to amass collections of May Show art, which I felt was undercutting the local for-profit art galleries. And as of 1992, the museum had determined that it had major exhibition slots on its calendar for only 4 shows a year, 4 big shows a year in that big 8,000 square foot space in the 1971 Breuer Wing. And one of those shows was the May Show. Would have prevented the museum from devoting its resources to any other major exhibitions of modern and contemporary art. Oh, by the way, this is a picture of the rope going down at the 1980, I think this is the 1981 May Show, where people are thronging in to buy work out of the show. That's the radio broadcaster Rena Blumberg on the left. So what we were, the May Show had an opportunity cost in that we weren't seeing in Cleveland a great many exhibitions of modern and contemporary art from around the world. And indeed, in the Sherman Lee and Evan Turner years, there were only 4 artists who had 4 living artists who had major shows there. Roy Lichtenstein in 1966, Isamu Noguchi in 1979. This is the Noguchi show. Paul Clay and R.B. Kitai in 1967 and 1982. This is the 1966 show of Lichtenstein. The first Cleveland artist to receive a major solo exhibition at CMA was Victor Schreckengost in 2000. This was the show that Henry very ably curated. It was a very memorable event. And as to the best of my knowledge, before that, the museum had never done a big solo show on a Cleveland artist. So another picture of the May Show. So my impression of it was that by the late 1980s and 1990s, it had grown into a stale tradition that had failed to demand the best of local artists and audiences, crowded out space on the calendar for exhibitions that would create a deeper understanding of modern and contemporary art from around the world. And I found that disappointing. I also sensed at the time the museum had a sense of this as well. In 1991, just before I arrived here, the museum organized an invitational with looking in depth at 15 Cleveland artists. Bob Bergman decided, when he arrived in 1993, decided to keep experimenting in that vein. And in fact, during his 6 years at the Cleveland Museum of Art before his untimely death in 1999, there was quite a bit of experimentation. There was a 1994 invitational, which looked in depth at 8 Cleveland artists. In 1996, the city's bicentennial year, the Urban Evidence Show in collaboration with the then Cleveland Center for Contemporary Art and Spaces, featuring 17 artists, 12 of them from Northeast Ohio. And also in 1996, the museum mounted this very important show, Transformations in Cleveland Art, 1796 to 1946, which was a fabulous survey of art history in the city. And the catalog is still, to my way of thinking, an incredibly important resource on the subject. 1998, again, while Bergman was still director, the museum was trying to achieve two things at once with Cleveland Collects Contemporary Art. One, to show examples of contemporary art from around the world being collected by local collectors, and to share the spotlight with local artists. So there were 60 global artists in this show, 10 of whom were from Cleveland. And then in 2000, we have the Schreckengoss show. There was a hiatus after that point. While Catherine Reed was a director, the museum was focused on laying the groundwork for its expansion and renovation. Although in 2005, we had the NEO show, which was an actively curated show of the type that I think the museum actually should be doing more often. In 2010, a fantastic solo show on John Paul Miller, which for my money is one of the best shows of by any Cleveland artist that I've seen in my 30 years. An incredible exhibition, sadly without a catalog. Also, with the opening of the East Wing of the museum in 2009, the museum devoted for the first time permanent space in its footprint, Gallery 228, which is actually 2 rooms devoted to Northeast Ohio art. And more recently, because there's now space in the calendar and the museum is taking modern and contemporary art more seriously, we've had a great, increasing number of shows in that area, including big shows on photography of Lee Friedlander, the Georgia O'Keeffe Living Modern, brand new and terrific by Alex Katz, the Albert Olin show of contemporary German painter, and Fu Baoshi, Chinese art in the age of revolution. The museum is also taking work by African-American artists way more seriously than it had in the past, with shows on Gordon Parks, Carrie Mae Weems, Jean-Michel Basquiat, that's William H. Johnson, lower right, Carol Walker, and there are other examples, including Hank Willis Thomas and Terry James Marshall. More examples of shows from around the world, the Kusama exhibition, the Ai Weiwei Zodiac animals in the atrium, Emeka Agbo sound installation in the atrium, and the more recent Second Careers show, combining historic and contemporary art from Africa, which I think was fabulous and could have been 3 times its size. There's a lineage of curators who are responsible for all of this. I'll show you first, top left, Edward Henning, who was the curator of modern contemporary art from the 1960s to the 1980s, who fought an uphill battle and was able to show some work from that era. But I think during this time, because of the May show, the museum was not able to do as much as it could have done to educate local audiences about modern and contemporary art from around the world. Top center, you have Tom Hinson, who became the curator of contemporary art and photography in the mid-1980s and built laid groundwork for the growing photography collection. Jeffrey Grove, top right, is the first curator, full-time curator of contemporary art, hired in 2001, succeeded by Reto Turing on the bottom left, and Bo Rutland as his associate. In 2012 and 2013, Barbara Tannenbaum becomes the full-time curator of photography in 2011. And then on the right, Emily Liebert and Nadia Rivera-Fella succeeding Reto and Bo. And in the center, Ki-Jo Lee, who is now in charge of special projects and academic affairs. Despite all the wonderful things the museum has been doing recently, I think in modern and contemporary, it has not participated in trends in the art world, such as the recent reevaluation of the New York School. And these are examples of the kind of shows that we have not seen. in Cleveland, the big de Kooning retrospective at Museum of Modern Art, and the Jackson Pollock show, also at MoMA, and the Action Abstraction exhibition at the Albright Knox. So these are the kinds of things that we haven't seen in Cleveland, and I find that deeply disappointing. So what should happen in the future? I think the Cleveland Museum of Art ought to do a sequel to the Transformations show, bringing local art history up to the present. This is something that this museum, with its vast resources, is in an excellent position to do. And I think that really, paying serious attention to local art and writing that history is something the museum very much should do. I think the museum and its curators should continue collaborating with local institutions like Art Neo, formerly the Cleveland Artists Foundation, which is an institution devoted solely to the history of Northeast Ohio art, and has done a lot of important scholarship and publishing on the subject. And the museum needs to recognize that we have a new institution in town, the Front Triennial Cleveland, the Front Triennial for Contemporary Art, organized by Fred Bidwell and the Front team. And lastly, the museum has access now to the Transformer Station and to its beautiful new community art center on the west side, which I think could become venues for more engagement with local artists. If there were to be a May show, I would not want to see it as an annual. I could see one perhaps every 5 years, so as not to trip over these other things that are happening on the calendar. With that, I'll toss it back to Michael. I look forward to Kijo's comments.
Thank you so much, Steven.
I'm gonna I'll mute my. Yeah, I got to
mute yourself and stop sharing your screen too.
Yeah, there you go. And
Perfect.
There you are. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's always fascinating, I'm sure, Kijo, to hear what people think the museum should do.
Absolutely. I mean,
Probably.
and yes.
I'm sure you just hear that nonstop. So it was, and on that score, when you and I talked a week or 10 days ago or whenever it was, I because of that conversation, I'm really looking forward to your comments tonight. So you take it away.
Great. Okay. First, thank you so much for bringing this panel together, to everyone at the Artist Archives, as well as to my fellow panelists and to Michael. So I want to first say that, yes, I work at the museum, and I do wield some power, but I do not have the power to either bring the May show back or stop it from coming back. But what I do hope to offer is a perspective coming from the archive. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see the bowl?
Yes, you're good to go.
Perfect. So, I want to preface these remarks with the understanding that I am approaching this topic from the perspective of an outsider. I've never experienced the May show, nor did I have any pre-existing knowledge of it prior to my arrival in Cleveland in 2017. So what follows is not meant to betray either the warm memories or the concrete economic results of the program. Rather, it's how I've come to know the May show, and couples, I hope effectively, the anecdotal experience with the yields of an albeit brief archival exploration. So I ask that you bear with me, as it's a lot to get through in this sort of 7 minutes that I've been allotted, and know that I'm happy to discuss any aspect of what I present here further, and that my perspectives are, of course, ever evolving. So what you're seeing on the screen is Cocktails and Cigarettes, the Punch Bowl, created in 1931 by Victor Schreckengost. And I want to recount my experience of this bowl, right? There's a simultaneity of my introduction to this piece and to the May show. So I encountered this bowl in the Jazz Age show that was on view in 2017 at the CMA. And so when Megan asked me to participate in this panel, it brought the experience back of speaking with Stephen Harrison, the then curator of decorative arts, about the bowl and bringing up Schreckengost, and immediately the first thing that was mentioned was his participation in the May Show. And it's come up over and over again. Along with other mentions of the May Show that sort of pepper my relatively short tenure in Cleveland. So I begin with this bowl, which sent me to the digital May Show archive and finding aid, which helped me to trace some of the structural details that would have otherwise been unsubstantiated subtext to the passionate anecdotes I've gratefully received. And so this punch bowl, and it's described in the interpretive text in our collections online, was designed by a young Victor Schreckengost and exhibited at the Cleveland Museum of Art's May Show of 1931. It foreshadows the demise of Prohibition in 1933, made at the Cowan Pottery Studio in Rocky River. The cocktails and cigarette bowl is a not so subtle reference to the two main vices of the Jazz age. And so I searched, the contemporary installation shots of the 1931 May Show, but I couldn't find this piece as it appeared, at least in the survey of the photographs that I looked at. Let's see. And so what I did happen upon, however, is this photo of the artist with his work, as well as the original entry card, which listed all the other pieces he'd submitted that year. Admittedly, the titles and descriptors sent me on another image search, which led me to this installation shot. And I apologize if it's difficult to see on your screens, but what was displayed here without explanatory text, and now described as inspired by the artist's visits to the Cleveland's Globe Theater on Woodland Avenue, is a painting called Blue, Blue Rebel. And it was also one of the entries into the 1931 show. And so the inspiration, that would have likely, I'm going to give you a better view of this. So it's the color image that you see appearing on the far right, So the inspiration that Schreckengost would have likely had would have included shows like Brown Skin Models. You're seeing an advertisement from the Brown Skin Models Review, which was a piece put together by Irvin C. Miller, who was an African-American playwright. And it was a review that ran from 1925 to 1955 and toured the country with great success, playing in big theater chains for 40 weeks a year. And it used the figure of the model to center a show of chorus line dancing, dress promenades, striptease, comedic sketches, and original music. Miller was inspired by the Ziegfeld Follies featuring Josephine Baker, but the show aimed to, and I quote, glorify the brown body, end quote, at center stage for solely Black audiences. Specifically, the idea for the show came to Miller one day when he was standing in front of a Broadway theater where the blazing lights announced that Flo Ziegfeld was glorifying the American girl. As he viewed the pictures displayed in the lobby, his attention was attracted to a beautiful, well-shaped Black lady walking down the street. Excuse me. The idea popped into his head. Why not glorify the brown-skinned girl? Knowing this led me to consider what were the logics governing Schreckengost's translation of an homage to brown-skinned beauty into an array of caricatured figures? And more importantly, what were the logics that governed the jury's decision to include it among prize winners? The archive yielded a full list of jurors for every show, and it was only then that I realized that the jury consisted of 3 prominent artists, art historians, and educators, and this is a quotation from the archives, who were chosen each year to select from thousands of entries and who were, and I quote, from out of town and sympathetic to a variety of arts. So I'm sort of taking our thinking of the show to its structure a little bit further back maybe than recent memory. So this is a jury from the 1931 show. So Miller's vision, right, was translated into a kind of caricature, and Schreckengoss's translations of Black culture at that moment were of greater note than their sources. So what does it mean for an entirely white jury to encounter these translations and deem them of proper quality? Quality, which is the word that has linked each of the written opinions without critique or definition. Whether pointing out that the show should not return because the museum should support regional artists who reflect qualities outlined in Vasari or demonstrated by Picasso, or that it shouldn't matter whether the output measures up to the qualities outlined by Vasari or embodied by Picasso, the idea that they are the bar against which our arguments should hinge is what makes the show, to me, an inappropriate model for how we come to be in community with regional artists today. And I point this out not to indict the artist or jury, but rather to suggest that the archive may offer a different account of the democratic nature of the May Show, as well as bring awareness to the non-neutrality of terms like quality, judgment, etc. Yes, these were folks of their time, but it's also the case that by this time, Frederick Douglass had spoken publicly about and popularly about the importance of self-presentations in defiance of caricature, and had developed an entire theory of photography as against painting as having possibilities for true representations of African-American subjectivity, though it wasn't encountered as such by the art world, capital A. The lack of encounter constitutes a limited scope of knowledge with really concrete results. And so that brings me to another work that was linked from the beginning to the May Show, because this painting, Bedtime, by Charles Salle, famously the first African-American to graduate from the Cleveland School of Arts, now Cleveland Institute of Arts, and one of the first pieces I ever taught from in the galleries. And the story that I received when I first arrived was that this piece had appeared in the May Show and had been collected or been gifted to the museum later. And so Salle, Schreckengoss's contemporary, entered the May Show consistently from 1935 to 1946. Of these works, all from the that you're seeing on the screen, all from the CMA's permanent collection, 3 have some connection to the show. So what you're seeing is in the this drawing here, which is named Anna, and here Bertha. Both were created, etchings created between, appeared on his 1937 entry form with a list price of around $150 each. Bertha appears again in 1938 with a notation not for sale. And that same year, Salle's works entitled Swing Time and Still Life receive honorable mention. And it's the first time his work is recognized with a prize. And so in 1940, not the painting, but an etching named Bedtime receives honorable mention. It's not for sale. And then in his final entry form in 1946, he receives honorable mention for 3 prints entitled The Company's Tent, England, Chalk Mine, and Campsite, each listed at $15. During that same period, Schreckengoss is also entering the May Show regularly. So following the logic of quality and expertise necessary to determine such, we might say that Salle's work was simply less accomplished than Schreckengoss, but I invite you to consider the portals through which the work passed. So note that Schreckengoss entered the May Show beginning in 1929 and won first prize for the bull in his second year of entry in 1931. So what we see here are the successive years, the juries for every single year that Salle and Schreckengoss were both submitting to and I can give you all of the names, but we don't have a lot of time. And just to give a sense of how those juries were structured in that moment. And so, to my mind, and this is in the year that Bedtime won honorable mention, this was the jury. And so what doesn't seem to have been addressed in the mediated debate is that no matter the year, whether there were 33 categories or 6, whether the artist could enter 20 pieces or 2, all agreed that those with the education, talent, and drive to determine quality were largely male and overwhelmingly white. Even the reference set for describing quality from Vasari to Schreckengoss to Picasso demonstrates a limited framework. And I'm sort of like, I see the issue. It only seems like this is a debate when we actually never shift the source of authority. In other words, we want to swim in the same muddy water, but come up clean. So if we reconsider Bedtime, which was a gift to the collection in 2006, it came into the collection in ways that are similar to how the bowl came into the collection much later and via a gift. And so I'm not saying that this was not a way for regional artists to be elevated to the level where they become collected. What I question is the very basis, right, of making that decision and determining the frameworks for how we decide what quality is, right? And so here we get to some of the tacit agreements that underpin this debate, which is perhaps why I'm on this panel, having never experienced the show and not being a native Clevelander, and which I'd like to address, which relieve me at least of the desire to revive the May Show and to instead consider the misrecognition of programs like Parade the Circle as art, the problematic descriptors of family-centered programming as anti-creative in some way, which perhaps we can get into further in the discussion, and the suggestion that a show juried by 3 people should be a barometer of the quality for an entire region. Like perhaps that just ain't it. And so this we're just continuing to think about the juries, and I just kind of want to close with this piece, Siesta, by William E. Smith. And it has the distinction among the few works that I've shown of having entered the collection the same year it appeared in the May Show, as well as having the distinction of being one of the very few Black artists in the collection with a direct relationship to the May Show through my preliminary research. Like I'm only scratching the surface. I haven't opened the boxes. This is approaching through all of our digital archives. And so in 1943, Siesta fails to place, while Schreckengoss takes first place for a work called Buffalo. And so I'm just want us to consider, right? So none of what I've said is meant to detract from the creativity of Schreckengoss, nor impugn the judgment of decades of jurors. Rather, it's to highlight the reality of human subjectivity, the necessity for the attention to the conditional nature of what we mean by quality, and the ways we measure success, and to be transparent about the reasons a resurgent May Show, which exists already, isn't quite as straightforward as one might imagine. This is not to say that had these faces all been replaced with Black ones, that the judgments would have been different. I mean, we know that class cuts in many different directions. But what I will say is that I cannot see in the mediated record when anyone who looks like me has been given the platform to address this show. And it didn't take me long to see an issue that unites the debaters and as such destabilizes the debate. The May Show, for all of its democratic claims and concrete elevations, was still culturally a closed circuit conversation that instead fed the very beast it claimed to slay. So what I want to explore is ways we can bring back the feeling of seeing oneself and one's experience in the galleries that mimics what's been described of the May Show, while leaving behind the limited frameworks I've demonstrated in this structure. So in the rest of the conversation, I'm hoping we can begin to recognize some of the programs that exist a bit differently and imagine other engagements that bring regional artists regularly to the center of the conversations in the galleries, rather than a yearly one-off. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kijo. The curator, LaTanya Autry, whose exhibits are presented now at MoCA Cleveland and MoCA with an H, the Museum of Creative Human Arts, and also at the Third Space Action Lab, has this phrase, museums are not neutral. And that's a really powerful phrase that applies broadly to the work that museums do. They make decisions, they have rationales, they have audiences and boards, all of which shape the choices that they make. And that's a fascinating thing about this conversation, is that the museum plays a role in our understanding of what art is and what is important art. And no doubt the history has long ignored certainly artists of color. And I think that the decisions that it's an interesting, it's what drives this conversation. It's people looking at the decisions that the museums make and feeling like they're spited or disregarded. And you can slice the population in a lot of ways based on where people come from or what they look like or what have you. Of course, museums make those choices. I am curious from anybody in the panel if you would say that an exhibit of this nature, so let's not stick on simply the annual May show or the term May show, but let's talk generally about an exhibit by the major institution in town that looks at art of the region. Is that about presenting excellence, or is it about mirroring the community and capturing creative output of a time? And as I say, just anybody in the panel that's game to respond to that.
I'd like to throw out a question. I don't know the answer to this, but there's an African-American artist in Cleveland who just died, Michelangelo Lovelace. I never met him. Has his work ever been shown at the Cleveland Museum? If there were a May show, it would have been. I first learned about him when I read about him in the New Yorker. And I think that says something very devastating about the art culture of Cleveland, that here is a figure of national interest and Cleveland is not giving him a voice. And it seems to me, I would agree about all this about, the judges at the May show in the past, although I guess I'd say that, the fact that Charles Salle showed his work at the May show was actually a pretty radical thing for that period, and a very positive thing. It seems to me one of the things that is lacking in Cleveland, and I guess let me put this in a different way. If you had been music critic in Boston in 1910, you would have thought that your job was to listen to the Boston Symphony and to write reviews of all the composers who were making music at Harvard. If you had really known what was going on, you would have gone down to Beale Street in Memphis and listened to the blues that were going to completely transform world music. And I guess to put that in perspective, if you had hung around in Beale Street, not all those people were great performers, but there was something going on that was worth listening to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I see the May show as sort of like reading the daily newspaper. And a lot of it is junk, but if you read the daily newspaper, you figure out what's going on. And we don't have a way of figuring out what's going on artistically in Cleveland. I mean, we do have ways. And, there are other aspects. I think that the collapse of the Plain Dealer as a daily newspaper has been, one of the many things that have been damaging to the arts culture of Cleveland.
I really appreciate both of those analogies, that you read the newspaper and find out what's going on, even if it may not all interest you or may not, meet your standard of what a story is. And likewise, that a music scene as a whole may not be entirely comprised of great musicians. I have to note that Michelangelo is at the museum, Michelangelo Lovelace. There's a great piece of his, which is actually, Kicho, I bet you want to talk about this. It looks like you're raising your hand.
Well, no, two things. I just wanted to say that my conversation about the series of jurors was not to impugn their judgment. It was to say that it is limited, just as I have my own blinders. I cannot speak for every single Black person who thinks about art, and that my ideas, there are likely people right now who are like, well, Kijo, that is not the point. Representation is the point. Here is the point. And so it was more about if we can admit to those limitations, then we can, to me, yes, the kind of authority that the museum wields around what we talk about when we talk about quality. I have my own preoccupations in the selections of works that I'll show in future exhibitions. Those are all part of the conversation. And so what I was trying to do was bring into the conversation a perspective that seemed to be that there seemed to be an agreement that we all agreed that this was the single framework through which we could understand whether or not to have the show. So I wanted to put that out there. And yes, the piece by Michael Lovelace is on view right now. And I don't know about the exhibition history of the work in the galleries. It also served as a centerpiece for our conversation for our MLK programming this year. That is not meant to cover all bases or to do what Henry is suggesting at all. So I just wanted to make sure that it's really essential to me that I also acknowledge, right, that I am part of the conversation when I say that we have structural blind spots, right? I do not disavow my own participation, right, in the conversation.
Stephen, are you waving your hand?
Yes. So I wanted to mention that I've been writing about Michelangelo Lovelace since the early 1990s. So, he did get a lot of attention from the Plain Dealer. His work was reproduced in our pages a number of times. And, we liked him a lot. Everybody thought he was terrific. And we published a tribute to him in the Sunday paper, where we talked about that painting of My Hometown, which he donated to the Cleveland Museum of Art in 2015, which I think is part of a very interesting story that could probably be explored further through conversations with his wife, Shirley Lovelace, who probably knows more about the story. But no matter how much attention we paid to Michelangelo, and no matter how hard he tried to break into the New York art scene and gain notice outside of Northeast Ohio, which was his fervent desire, nothing happened until the work was noticed on the museum's website by an art dealer who was perusing the website in late 2017, and who decided to cold call the artist and invited him to have a show in New York in 2018, which is what generated the review that Henry mentioned from the New Yorker. And it also sparked reviews in the New York Times and an art forum. So that's sort of the random way that the art world has worked in his case. And it's so unfortunate that he was able to attain the kind of level of visibility that he was seeking only towards the end of his life. I wanted to say that I agree with Kijo that all judgments are inherently subjective. What I'm looking for as a critic is someone who is out there trying to make those judgments and trying to shape some kind of understanding of our art history, local or otherwise. And that's what I would want to see any exhibition about Northeast Ohio art accomplishing at the Cleveland Museum of Art. I just think that the old system of the May Show, however it evolved over the years, by the time I got here, it was something where people were just submitting if they felt like it and they wanted to get in the show. So what I had heard at the time was that some artists were afraid to submit because they didn't want to be rejected, and others didn't want to submit because they thought the level of quality would be too low. And overall, I found that a lot of people were frustrated with it, and that by the end, it had faded in quality and popularity. I think the Neo show received a much more positive response in 2005. The point that I wanted to make, and I think I should reinforce this, was that the high turnover among directors at the Cleveland Museum of Art between 2000 and the present has distracted attention from the problem that Henry is trying to focus on here tonight, which is what should the museum be doing vis-a-vis the local artist community. And there was a great deal of attention that Bob Bergman paid to that in his 6 years, and I think Henry's Richter Schreckengoss show was very much a part of that. But the museum drops the ball. So for the past 20, 21 years, this has not been a front burner issue, and perhaps it should be.
I think most of the museum's directors have come and gone during the time that I've been back in Cleveland since the demise of the May show. Kijo, maybe is there a way that the museum systemically looks for what is interesting in the region's art?
So that's a really good question. So as you can imagine, there are ways that, yes, we are engaging in multiple ways in multiple departments. I think that in some ways, one might imagine that there's sort of one big meeting that we all get to, all 400 plus of us get together and say, hey, what's going on in the region? But that is absolutely not the case. So yes, I think that there are ways that say our curators of contemporary art are engaging really directly. So I think of how, and I think that, so first I want to say that I struggle with the idea of what a regional artist is, because I'm not from the Midwest. And so Cleveland-based artists are national artists, are international artists. So I'm always struggling with this. How do we relate directly to regional artists? What does that mean? Folks who moved and lived and are working here, folks who grew up here. So that's one question that I just want to put to the side. But secondly, I think that, yes, so I think about ways in which there will be Cleveland-based artists that are appearing in the Motherhood show that will open this year. The ways in which programs like Andrew Capetta, my colleague who runs exhibition programs, is working directly with regional artists and Cleveland-based artists for conversations, like these broad-ranging conversations around artworks that bring relevance, right, on relevant topics through the exhibition. I think about an exhibition that I'm working on that's considering public monuments and, you know, the deep preparation of engaging our arts community, all of our communities, right? So I think that what this conversation lets me know is we are doing a terrible job of actually making visible, right, what these engagements look like, because they may not look the same as the May show. But again, what I'm interested in is how to recapture the feeling, right? I'm seeing the passion exhibited in the chat and in the questions, and the examples, right? The individual examples of the benefits gained from either showing or going to that show. So I think that to me, what we are always looking at is how we can deepen, right, our relationship with the community of artists beyond hiring as teaching artists, or beyond something that is finite or for a period. How do we do it longer term? And I mentioned to you in our earlier conversation that to me would be way more interesting is a program that is regular, in which people are allowed to bring works into a gallery of their choice under specifications, please don't kill me, collections and conservation. And that we have conversations around those works, right? The conversations where it is, why did you select to have your work contextualized here? Because I think what we're losing in not having the more direct engagements that might have been represented in the May show is how Cleveland-based artists are historicizing the present in their work and how it can actually elevate or refract, right, art history looking backward. I think we spend a lot of time thinking about how they, the work that's being produced now narrates this exact moment, but we forget that it isn't only about how the legacy or the endowments from the collection that contemporary artists get, but it's how they help us see that past history completely differently. So I'd like to see that happen on a regular basis rather than something that is, to my mind, trapped in that kind of mire, right, of the sort of imperial authority that museums have, but I just don't think we need to double down on it in that way.
So thinking less about presentation and collection and judgment, and more about conversation that about works that come in, you know, sort of like the kind of peer review conversations that happen in some galleries. Like, is that the sort of thing that you're?
I think there's one interesting thing that's come out, that the Cleveland Museum has a huge number of curators, but it doesn't have anyone who is thinking about basically the art of the Cleveland community, and thinking about that not as just something historical, but as something that is going on right now. I guess the other model I would use is that if you think of successful magazines like The New Yorker, the basic principle of their success is the idea of mix, that they have these long articles about pesticides and nuclear war, but they also have cartoons, they've got the talk of the town, they've got short stories, they've got book reviews, and it seems to me that for a museum as large and well-funded as the Cleveland Museum of Art, that they should think more about mix, and they should also think more about what the product is. I guess I would say that it seems to me, if you look at traditional areas of art history, the Cleveland Museum has really fallen short in terms of serious scholarship in many areas. You know, they've actually had to withdraw some of their own publications because they didn't meet an acceptable standard.
Is what the museum does about creating a draft of history, what the museum does with contemporary art specifically, and let's say art of the region, is that about creating a draft of history, or is it about connecting with the people who live here?
Well, how would I say? I'm thinking if the May show is something else, because I would very much agree with Steve Litt. I don't think that the Cleveland Museum has done a great job of showing the best international modern art from around the world. And,
there's a difference between whether they should do something like that show, and let me emphasize something like that show, versus a judgment about how well they have done it or did it, you know, for the last 30 years of that exhibit. Those are different
well,
things.
here I'm being maybe a bit paradoxical, because it seems to me that there is the issue of curatorial quality that.
Yeah. Do these museums, you know, there's this phrase about the first draft of history, newspapers or journalists writing the first draft of history. Is that what museums do with contemporary art, or is that somebody else's job?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry, Michael.
Well, there's the phrase that the line that journalists write the first draft of history, and then of course time goes by and scholars look at what's written, and this is the first line of documentation. Museum exhibits are a kind of documentation like that. They play a role in how we understand culture going forward.
Yeah.
So do museum exhibits have that role?
I think they do, but I think that there are those of us who question the very stability of the right, who want to draw attention to the fact that it is a point of view. If you look at Stories from Storage, part of the reason for that being is about demonstrating that institutional voice is actually a bunch of voices that both, and sometimes that conflict with or don't jive with what the institution wants at the time. So this was also an opportunity to tell stories that didn't necessarily fit even with that. So I think that there's this this sense that when you walk into a museum, and I had this same sense before I learned that there was a whole engine behind what feels really self-evident when you walk into the galleries. And I think that's my point. Those things that are self-evident are all contingent, right? They are all contingent and on taste, on all of those things. But it is, so yes, I think that it writes the roughest draft based upon individual preoccupations and history accretions of history that say this is what we do, which I think goes to some of the questions that are in the Q&A, right? If it is, this is what museums do, and it's what we have said we do, and now, it can feel, I think, in some ways like a betrayal that I'm casting a look backward and being like, yeah, but that's not what we have to do. Yeah.
And I'm sorry to break in on the conversation, but unfortunately, due to time restrictions, we'll probably have to kick it over to Q&A relatively soon. Maybe do like one or two, but for everyone who has a lot of questions in the chat, we will have, thanks to Zoom, a record of all of those questions in the chat. And we can potentially make those available in a Facebook group or a public forum. So that way the conversation has potential to keep going. And and that way we're also with time. So
thank you so much, Megan.
And then I disappear into the background.
No, I appreciate your keeping after us, because I was just distracted by listening to people. So I am going to look at the Q&A, because we've had just a ton of response from people, both in the chat and in the actual Q&A function. I'm going to address one of these myself. Just somebody nudges us to note that Lakeland Community College has been running a May show for the last 14 years. I want to note too that Mansfield Arts Center also has something that they call the May show. Both of those are, if they're not open right now, they are opening in a minute. So just to get the word out about those.
And links are in the chats for both exhibitions.
Fabulous, that's great. So here's a good question. Oh, did I click to the wrong place in I just lost, there it is. So judgment seems to be at the crux of the May show, aside from a community building event, which is also important. Kijo so eloquently reminded us of the need to shed mostly white frameworks. There is tension between broad encouragement of artists and the selection of the, quote, best, with all of its financial and reputational renown. So how do you elevate artists? It is not feasible to elevate all art production to some choice. It's not feasible to elevate all art production, so some choice is necessary. So what kind of rubric can you use? That's like a huge question.
Yeah. I think that I just want to say that I'm not claiming that there is some way in which we could elevate all things at once. Of course, there's choice. I am very comfortable with claiming expertise in particular areas while also allowing for that to be porous enough, right, to have conversations around things that might not be automatically appealing, or to be open to the prospect that my framework may be limited and that the thing that doesn't appeal to me. So I think that that's where I would like to reside, rather than what are the check marks we can do to not be racist, not be sexist, not to blah, 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 but to be upfront with what the actual rubrics were for us, right? So I'm preoccupied with a particular set of objects for a particular reason at a particular time, and to be upfront about that, rather than claiming the dominion and the capacity to provide a full snapshot of any one thing.
Yeah. Let's see. Some of what we have in the Q&A are statements. Some of them are lengthy. Let's see. I'm sorry. Somebody in the hallway is calling. So here's another question. Did the May show help increase diversity of works and attendees at the museum? Do we have any data about this? And I guess I have to assume from this question that what they're talking about is the diversity of people, of races that attended. I've got to believe that in sort of a community theater kind of way, more people would show up because someone they know has work in the show. But this is the question: did the May show help increase diversity of works and attendees? Does anybody know that?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I think somebody should. And when I'm advocating for the Cleveland Museum of Art to follow up on the Transformations exhibition with a new catalog that documents Cleveland art from 1946 to the present, one of the things that I would like to see in such a book is an honest self-evaluation by the museum of its own history and how it shaped views of art in the community. And I think you had just a little bit of a taste of that tonight from Kijo, and I thought that was fantastic. And I would have suspected that most of the jurors were white and that we were getting one kind of viewpoint. When I showed the slide of all the abstract expressionists you've never seen at the Cleveland Museum of Art, I think that the museum very much sort of created an atmosphere in this community that sealed it off from global trends, and that it could have taken a much greater role in championing the cause of new art, of course, which some of which would come from this region. So I think in a way the museum was discouraging and disparaging contemporary art during those decades. That's an impression I have. I would defer to deeper scholarship on that, but that's a hunch that I've had for many years, and I would love to see someone dig into that. A sequel to Transformations should include an honest self-evaluation of the museum's own history and the way it has shaped various perspectives on contemporary art in Northeast Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And then just, we will probably have to wrap it on up. So however you want to file statements or whatever questions, I'm the little angel of time that I flit in and flit away.
Sure, I appreciate that somebody's doing that. And I'm sorry that we're not getting to all these questions. There's got to be 20 questions in the Q&A, and there's probably 25 more, something in the chat. It struck me that everybody in this conversation has talked about what more the museum could be doing to support or to engage with contemporary professional artists in town. And all of you have talked about, very different ways of doing that, just using that show, the May show as a starting point, but we've talked about different versions of a similar kind of thing, or completely, in Kijo's case, different types of engagement. I know that there is a significant ecosystem of different organizations in town that has evolved, especially in the years since the May show. I know that when one organization does something, it's interesting to see how others respond or fill a need or try to. One of the questions that came up that we're not going to get to was, is there another organization in town with the heft that the museum has that could do some similar kind of thing that would support artists of the region? You know, it's not a surprise that artists would love to see any kind of recognition inside the museum or that level of discussion of their work. I'm really struck, though, that the three people who have completely different roles and perspectives in this conversation all have sort of come to the idea that the museum could do more to somehow engage artists in town in the present. I would like to leave it there and say thank you to Megan and Mindy and Kelly from Artists Archives once again, and ask if you have any closing comments or housekeeping.
Sure, I can jump in there. Let me start my video. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. Great comments in the chat. I know you panelists probably couldn't see them because you're concentrating on actually talking between yourselves, but we've had some fantastic comments in the chat and in the Q&A. I like your wrap up, Michael, very much. There definitely needs, I think there needs to be something more from the museum and something more that they can do. And that does seem to be a suggestion of all three panelists, and what that thing is and what shape it should take and all of that kind of stuff is, you know, is probably something that needs to be discussed further. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to share my screen again real quick. And just to let people know that there are some things coming up for you. We appreciate you coming tonight, and we appreciate you sticking out and staying for so long. And, you know, if you'd like to become more involved in the archives, please, there's your information on the screen. I think there was a problem with a link from the Zoom to the Facebook page, so I hope that we didn't lose too many people on Facebook that they found actually the Facebook. It was some kind of issue with an email that we had sent out that wasn't working, but I'm assuming that they found us on Facebook. So anyway, I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Steven. Thank you, Kijo. Thank you very much, Michael. And thank you, Kelly, for manning the tech. And please don't be a stranger, come into the archives. And thanks again, everybody, for participating. And don't forget to take the survey. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, just letting everyone filter out. And for those who are still here, we'll figure out a way to get that chat and those questions somewhere out there so that there can be continued participation. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and close this down and end our session tonight, but everyone have a wonderful night. And thank you for joining us. This could be 2 programs. So thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.